Friends, today I'll be talking about a very important topics in community ecology, and this topic will be dealing about basically about competition in, among different species which occur in a community. So what exactly do we mean by community? Before I move on to the specific topic, that is competition among species, I'll just like to talk about what exactly community means in ecological terms. And this will be the outline of today's lecture. What all I'll be talking about here is intraspecific competition, that is competition between individuals of the same species. Interspecific competition, which is competition between individuals of different species, and certain mathematical models which have been developed by certain scientists, which tells us the outcome of competition between different species in a community. And of course, I'll be talking about certain experiments and field studies on competitive exclusion. And then I'll be discussing briefly about another model of competition which was given by Tillman. So the outcome of this lecture should be that after this we should be able to tell about different types of competition and what are the various outcomes of competition between species in a community. So before moving further on with the topic specific topic competition, let me just discuss what exactly community is. Community in ecological terms is very much different from what we perceive in our day-to-day world. Like we have heard of a religious community or a tribal community when we talk about humans. But in the case of humans, when we talk of religious community, we are basically talking of people following similar religion or the same religion. When we talk of tribal community, we are talking of individuals of a tribe which are living together. But in this particular sense, community is only talking about individuals of the same species, which is Homo sapiens. But when we talk of individuals of, ecological community, we are basically talking of assemblage of a number of individuals of different species, which are living together in the same place and same time. Now, these individuals of different species which are living together, they might be interacting with each other or they might not interact with each other directly. So, what I mean to say is that these individuals, they might be having direct interaction like a predator-prey interaction, or they might not be having any direct interaction with each other, but they might be, suppose they are using similar resource. So, if population of one species increases too much, then that will lead to decrease in the population of another species. So, there is an indirect interaction. So, all these individuals of different species which are living together, they are interacting or they have a potential for interaction, or they are affecting each other in one or another way. Now, these communities which we talk of in our daily usage, we basically call these communities based on the dominant vegetation type which persists in that particular community. Usually we talk of like tropical forest community, coniferous forest community. So we are talking of these community in the sense that we are naming them by the dominant vegetation which is present in that particular region. And all these communities, they basically, because of a number of interactions which are occurring between species, they show specific pattern of interaction, and these interaction will bring about specific patterns in a given community. Based on these interactions, we can always predict what would be the outcome of a particular interaction, because we have studied a number of field sites. What exactly are the interaction between different species in a community? We can always gauge, or we can always predict what could be the outcome if we change this interaction in this manner, in this particular manner. Now, these interactions which are occurring between different species, they have not evolved just all of a sudden. Because these species are living together at a particular place, it is assumed that these species have been living together for a very long time. In the context of evolutionary time, it means that they have been living together for a very long time, and they have developed interactions or ways of interacting with each other, which is dependent on the resources present in the region as well as the environmental condition. So whatever we observe amongst different species in a community, that is an outcome of a very long process of evolution, along with the interactions of the organism with the environmental condition and with each other. Now, these interactions amongst the individual organisms and different species with each other, they are basically very often they are very difficult to define, because we cannot put them to certain scale. We cannot assign scales to them. They are very difficult to define, and what we try to interpret through these interactions, we basically have to go to field for finding what exactly are these interactions and how they are affecting each other. If two species are interacting with each other, whether the interaction is positive or negative, whether it helps in the increase of population of one species or it leads to decrease in the population of other species, that all has to be studied in the field. And that is very subjective, because we cannot just put it to any sort of quantitative scale. It is more or less qualitative criteria, and it's more or less qualitative aspect of interaction. Now, there are a number of interactions which we can talk of amongst organisms which are present in different regions and different communities, and these interactions basically help any ecologist to basically assign a framework to the community which he or she has been studying. Now, these interactions which are occurring between different species, they can be manipulated by humans. Suppose there is an abundance of a herbivore which is present in a grassland, and these herbivores put on check the grassland, the population of different wild grass which are present in that particular region. Now, if a human colony is settled nearby this particular region, and the cattle of humans start encroaching the grassland where this wild community is living, then these cattle will start eating the grass which are eating the grass species which is present in that particular region. Now, what will be the effect of this particular interference? It will lead to either movement of the wild species out from that area because no more food is available there, or it will lead to death of all those individuals if there is no way out for those species, if they cannot migrate from there. So, before studying any community or before interfering with any community, we need to know what are the different type of interactions which are occurring between all the species present in that particular community. And that's why this particular aspect of community ecology is very important, where we tend to study various types of interaction occurring between species. Now, when we talk of interaction in our day-to-day life, we are basically talking of how we are dealing with other people in our vicinity or whom we know, or our colleagues or our friends. When we talk of community interaction, we can talk at two levels. First level is basically when individuals of the same species are interacting with each other, and this type of interaction is termed as intraspecific interaction. Whereas when we talk of interaction between individuals of different species, that type of interaction is termed as interspecific interaction. So, intraspecific means individuals of the same species, of the same population which are interacting with each other, and interspecific means individuals of different species which are interacting with each other. There are a number of interactions which occur between individuals or species in a community. Like I've already talked about predation in some other lecture. Then there are other interactions like mutualism, amensalism, commensalism, and a number of other interactions, symbiosis. Today, since I'm talking about competition, so I'll be focusing on this. As the word suggests, competition. This particular word basically denotes when more than one individual are competing for the same resource. There is a given resource, and more than one individual are trying to get hold of that resource. Many of us have attempted for a number of competitive exams during our student life or afterward. So what does that mean? That means there are a number of seats for a given institution. Suppose we talk of medical entrance. There are a specific number of seats there, and a large number of people are competing for those particular seats. So they have to appear for entrance, and merit is made, and the individual who scores high marks, who are in the merit list, they take those seats. So basically we are competing for a resource which in this particular case is the number of seats, and we are competing with our fellow individuals. That is intraspecific competition for gaining access to those seats. Now, how is competition important? How does it shape the population of a given species? because there is a limitation on the source, there is a limited source available or resource available. What exactly competition is doing? Only the individuals who are most fit for utilizing that particular resource, they are able to catch hold of that resource, and only those individuals will be selected. So in nature, if there is a limited resource and a number of individuals of the same population want a hold of that resource, only the individuals who are more fit for gaining access to that resource, they will catch hold of that resource, they will utilize that resource, they will be more fit and they will produce more progeny when the time comes for them to reproduce. So in this way, individuals who are more fit will be present in the population for a number of generations. So this is how competition occurs when we talk of competition between individuals of the same population. Now when we talk of interspecific competition, there is again a limited resource, but now the competition exists between individuals of two different species. So they both are vying for the same resource, and the individual of the species, whichever species individual is more strong or more fit, he or she will gain access to that particular resource. So this particular panel shows us certain examples or certain pictures of real life situations where intraspecific competition occurs. When we watch our National Geographic channels or Discovery Channel, we watch animal documentary, number of times we see animals fighting with each other. Either they are males fighting with each other or they are females fighting with each other. When they are fighting with each other, they are not fighting at random. They are fighting to gain access to a particular resource or to protect a particular resource which they think that they should use, and which they protect from some other individual from utilizing. So in this particular panel, we see males of different animal species ranging from invertebrates to herbivores and carnivores who are fighting with each other. They are basically fighting mostly the fight which we see in nature, that occurs for controlling territory, or secondly it occurs for gaining access to mate. Both these resources are very important, because if there is no territory for any individual to reside in, then that individual will not be able to get any food, and secondly, if there is no territory, that individual will not be able to find mate, and if that individual is not able to find mate, that individual will not be able to reproduce, and if it is not able to reproduce, it will not be able to produce young ones and cannot pass on its gene. So that individual will be unfit for that particular environment. So that individual will be selected again. So whenever we see in nature, all individuals are competing for resource to gain access for food, for shelter, for habitat, for nesting ground, or for mates. So this is intraspecific competition when it is happening between individuals of the same species. Now this particular type of competition, it basically regulates population density to a certain extent, and it basically comes into action when the population density starts increasing. At low population density, it might not lead to any regulation of the density of the species, but at higher density, it might be an important factor in density dependent regulation of population. Now, where is this type of intraspecific competition seen? Where do we find intraspecific competition to be too severe, or where do we find species to be very aggressive? Well, there is no such criteria of species being aggressive. All the species in nature, they are aggressive when it comes to utilization or protection of their resource. So you will find intraspecific competition throughout the animal world in all the species. Mostly it is very evident in species which establish hierarchy. Hierarchy is basically there is an alpha male, then omega and beta and so on. So there is an alpha male who is the most dominant, which we can see in langurs or which we can see in wolves. Wolves, both male and female, are dominant. There is an alpha male which controls the entire group, and then there is second one, third one, fourth one, and so on. So here we will see that if a male who belongs to a lower hierarchical level, if he wants to control the entire group, then he will have to fight with the alpha male. So therein occurs our competition, where all the individuals want to be the dominant individuals and control the entire habitat for food, or the entire group for mating. Also, through there might be direct interaction between these individuals which prevent or limit the access of resource to more subordinate individuals. So whenever there is a kill by a pride of lion, the lion is though the lionesses are the one which kill the animal, lion is the first one which gets the share of the prey. It is the first one to eat, then comes the lionesses, and then come the second level females, and so on. So whenever there is a resource, the most dominant individual gets hold of the best part of the resource, then the next dominant, and so on. So there is always a fight for individuals to gain the dominant position. This is your interference or intraspecific competition, where there is direct contact between the individuals who are competing for the same resource. It also exists in the species who are capable of establishing territory. The species which establish their territories for residing, for their hunting grounds, for giving birth to young ones or laying eggs, they maintain a specific territorial area, and they prevent any other individual from coming to that particular region. So herein, if any other individual tries to come to that territory, they will beat that individual away, they will harm that individual and drive him or her away from that territory. So this is another example of interference competition. So only those individuals who are the most dominant, they will be able to hold large size territory, and they will exclude all other weaker individuals from the territory, and therefore because they have the territory in hold, they will also be able to find better mates, and they will also be able to increase their reproductive success, and they will produce more of young ones and pass off their genes to the next generation. So herein we see in interference competition, which is a type of intraspecific competition, there is direct interference of individuals from gaining access to resource, and this is done by the dominant individual. Another type of intraspecific competition is exploitation competition. Herein there might not be direct competition between the individuals, but since both the individuals, two or more than two individuals are competing for the same resource, the individual who is better able to utilize the resource, he or she will deplete the resource very fast so that it becomes unavailable to the other individual, and therefore the individual who is not able to utilize resource, that individual will be left in lurch. For example, if there is a species where males have to find mate, the individual male who is going to find mates at a faster pace, he will be able to pass off more of its genes rather than the male who is sluggish and slow and is not able to find mates. So herein there is no direct interference between the individuals, but there is indirect interaction because resource is being utilized by one individual at a faster rate as compared to other. And another example is if one individual is able to eat at a very fast rate as compared to another individual, then the second individual who is not a fast eater will get very less of energy and will be subjected to diseases, or will not be able to find its mate, will not be able to protect itself. So this type of competition, whether exploitative or interference, when it occurs amongst individuals of the same species, is termed as intraspecific competition, and it may cause density dependent mortality amongst the individuals of the population. When the population becomes very high, then because of the high density, individuals of the species might leave the herd, they might be susceptible to death or predation, or they might die because of less availability of resources. So this is how intraspecific competition can change the density of the population or the structure of the population. Then coming to another important type of competition, which is interspecific competition. As the name suggests, it is basically competition between population of two species, and it occurs when the resource which they are competing for is in limited supply. If the resource is abundant, of course there will not be any competition between individuals of the same species or individuals of different species. But whenever the resource is less in supply, then there is going to be fierce competition, and both the individuals of both the species have to compete with each other if they are to use that resource, if they are able to gain nutrition or mates or territorial grounds, and this might lead to adverse effect on both the species. Whenever there is interspecific competition, it will have adverse effect on both the competing species. Now, like intraspecific competition, there are two broad categories of interspecific competition: the interference competition as well as exploitation competition. In interference competition, there is direct interfering or direct inhibiting of individual of one species by another species, whereas in exploitation competition, there is a greater use of resource by one species, which leaves the other species with lesser resource. So both the categories of both types of competition can be found in interspecific competition also, but it has this broader classification has been further streamlined into 6 different types of interspecific interaction or competition by Schoner. And these interspecific competition which have been categorized are consumption, preemption, overgrowth, chemical interaction, territorial competition as well as encounter competition. So these are the 6 different categories into which interspecific competition has been divided by this scientist. Now, what are these 3 different competition? It has been studied in fields in a number of species, both plants and animals, in both aquatic ecosystem as well as terrestrial ecosystem, and these studies have shown different extent of encounter competition, territorial competition, chemical overgrowth, preemptive and consumptive competition between different species in different zones. For example, in aquatic region, we can see overgrowth in plant is one of the dominant form, as well as the preemptive form is one of the dominant form of competition, whereas in animals it is consumptive competition is the most dominant. Whereas in terrestrial region, we can see that for plants the consumptive competition is most prevalent, whereas in animals also it is consumptive competition. So there is different extent of these competition which occur between species of plants and animals in aquatic as well as terrestrial habitats or ecosystem. What exactly is consumption competition? Consumption competition, when we talk of, it is basically talking about how fast a species is able to consume or utilize the resource. So it is based upon the utilization of a renewable resource by a species. When 2 species are sharing the same resource, if one species consumes it at a faster rate, of course it is going to inhibit the population growth of the second species. Second is preemption competition. Now this is based upon preempting or preoccupying the space or habitat by a given species. Now it usually occurs in sessile organisms like plants or like barnacles or mussels, which occupy a specific habitat which get fixed in that particular habitat. If there are 2 different species which are going to attach themselves to a particular habitat like barnacles and mussels, or if there are 2 different species of plants which are going to get located in a specific region of earth, then the species which is able to come there faster, which is more motile during its initial stages, that species will be able to settle faster as compared to the species which has lesser means of migration and coming to that particular region. The third is overgrowth. Overgrowth is usually seen in individuals which grow upon each other or grow over another individual, and in this particular manner they deprive the other individual of the resource, which is very commonly seen in trees and plants. The trees which are fast growing, they will grow very fast, they will overshadow the other trees and they will not let them grow. Similar is the case with oysters. These will grow at faster rate and they will not let other organisms to have specific food which is present in the region. Then chemical interaction is other type of competition, wherein a toxin or a chemical is produced by any individual which inhibits other individual to come in that particular space, and it's very common in plants. These plants basically produce chemicals which they release to their surrounding, and this particular phenomenon is termed allelopathy. And when these chemicals are present in the surrounding, individuals of other species will never be able to establish themselves, and it can also be seen in animals when they release chemicals for basically driving away intruders in that particular region. Then territorial competition is basically when 2 species are competing for space. As we know that there is limited space present on our earth for the wildlife to exist, and there might be more than one species which might be present in a region, and they want to utilize that particular region for giving birth to young ones or for finding prey. So there is going to be a territorial war between these two species for controlling the territory, so that more hunting can be done and more young ones can be given birth to. So this is another type of competition which is very prevalent in the wild world. And then there is encounter competition, which is basically non-territorial competition, and it only occurs when there is chance meeting between individuals of different species, and usually it causes negative result for at least one of the species, or it might cause negative result for both the species. For example, if there is an encounter between leopard and hyenas in African savannas, then it will be detrimental for both the hyenas as well as the leopards, because both are equally superior in terms of strength. Whereas if there is an encounter between lion and cheetah, then it will be harmful only for cheetah, because lion is going to kill cheetah. So whenever there is encounter competition, it might cause harm to both the species or only one of the species. But overall, it leads to loss of time or energy. For example, if lion has to chase cheetah, it is losing its energy, it is losing the time which it could have utilized in hunting the prey. Or it might also lead to theft of food. For example, hyenas usually scavenge, and they take away food which is hunted by lions, cheetahs and leopards. So this basically leads to overall loss to the competing species. Now this particular intraspecific competition which we talk of has been talked about in detail by designing mathematical models, and two scientists, basically American Alfred Lotka and Italian Vittorio Volterra, they described relationship using mathematical models, and both of them used the logistic model of population growth. And they basically talked about how a population is going to increase till its carrying capacity when another population is also present in the region. So what exactly will be the outcome if there are two population present in a region which is having a specific carrying capacity? We know that logistic model talks about dn by dt is equal to Rn, k minus n by k. The rate of growth of a population is dependent on the natural rate of increase into the population size and 1 minus n by k, that is k, where k is the carrying capacity and 1 minus n k is the resource which are remaining for the carrying capacity to be reached by the population. Now I can tell this how exactly we are going to talk about this with the help of an example. Suppose there is a room and there are about 100 burgers in that room, and either males or females can eat those burgers. Now a male student can eat 10 burgers. That is just a supposition for explaining this specific competition. Now suppose a male student can eat 10 burgers, and when that individual is eating burgers, he can inform his friends also. So in total, in this particular room, the number of individuals which can be supported by the number of burgers is 10 male, because one male can eat 10 burgers. That means 100 burgers can be eaten by 10 male student. So the carrying capacity for this particular room is 10 for male student. If we compare that with female, now female, suppose they can eat 5 burgers at a given time, and there are only 100 burgers in the room. That means one female can eat 5 burgers, so there will be 20 female which will be supported by these 100 burgers. So the carrying capacity for this particular room is 20. So we can see here that if we take these males and females to be two different species, then we can see that the carrying capacity for male is very much different as compared to female. Though the amount of resources is same, but the carrying capacity is lesser for male as compared to female, because males are consuming more resource. Now this is when we are talking of male and female in isolation, or when we are representing them as species 1 and 2. If they both are put together, what will be the outcome? What will be the outcome? Suppose there are 10 males. If there are 10 males in the room, then of course there cannot be any females, because 10 males eat 100 burgers. Now if there is only one male in the room, and 1 is equal to 1, if we consider that to be species 1, if there is only one male, that individual will eat 10 burgers. Remaining burgers are 90 burgers. Now these 90 burgers will be eaten by how many females? 18 females, because one female eats 5 burgers. So this particular room can either support 10 males no females, or 1 male 18 females, or 2 males 16 females, and so on, till we reach the other end of the spectrum where this particular room or this environment can support 20 females and no males. So there is a wide range of spectrum which includes individuals from both the males as well as females. When we talk of a specific carrying capacity, there is a limited carrying capacity, and this particular carrying capacity can support different assemblages of population of species. That means different number of individuals of two species can be supported by this particular room. So what happens in nature, if we talk of species 1, if we take male to be species 1 and female to be species 2, assuming, because they are of the same species, but just for the timing, if we assume that, then dn1 by dt, that is the rate of growth of this particular one species, will be r1 into n1, which I have already talked about the logistic equation, and for species 2 will be r2 n2 into k2 minus n2 by k2 when they are present separately. But when they are present together, then we have to take into account the competitive effect of one species on the population growth of other species, because when there is only one male, then 18 female can be supported. But when there are 20 females, no males can be supported. So when two species are competing for the same resource, they will be having some or other effect on each other, and this can be given by this particular term alpha n2 and beta n1, where alpha is the per capita effect, competitive effect of species 2 on 1. How much effect individuals of species 2 is having on the individuals of species 1, and beta is per capita effect of species 1 on species 2 population. So these alpha and beta are basically the terms, these are competition coefficient, which help us to find out how much effect total number of individuals of n2 are having on n1, and how much effect total number of individuals of n1 are having on n2. Now this competition coefficient, if we try to define it, it is a factor for converting an individual of one species into an equivalent number of individuals of competing species based on their shared use of the resources, which define the carrying capacity. For example, individual species 1 is equivalent to beta individual species 2, and individual of species 2 is equivalent to alpha individuals of species 1. So this is very important here, because we are basically converting individuals of one species into individuals of other species using the competition coefficient, and here we see individual of species 1 is equivalent to beta individuals of species 2, whereas individual of species 2 is equivalent to alpha individual of species 1. So when we take this into account, when we take that two species are living together, then logistic equation is modified such that dn1 by dt is equal to r1 n1 into k1 minus n1 minus alpha n2. Alpha n2 are basically the individuals of species 2 who are competing for the resource, for the same resource, and the carrying capacity for this region is k1. Carrying capacity for population 1 is k1, and dn2 by d2 we have included term b and 1. These are the individuals of species 1 who are competing for a given resource with individuals of species 2, for which the carrying capacity is k2. Now if we come back to our example, we know that there are 100 burgers and there are 10 burgers for each male student. K1 is 10, whereas for females K2 is 20, because for each female eats only 5 burgers. Now if room is at K1, if there are 10 males, that is 10 males are present and 1 male leaves without eating, then how many females can come in? That we can easily find by using competition coefficient, because in this particular case alpha is equal to 0.5. That means individuals of species, individuals of male which are equivalent to female is 0.5. One individual equal to 0.5 of female, whereas beta is equal to 2. That means 2 females equal to 1 male, and 0.5 male equal to 1 female. So here we can see what exactly alpha and beta means. Beta is equal to 2. What does it mean? I am repeating it again. Beta is equal to 2. It means that 2 individuals of female are equivalent to 1 individual of male, because 1 female can only eat 5 burgers, whereas 1 male can eat 10 burgers. So beta is 2, whereas 1 male can eat 10 burgers and female can eat only 5. So 1 male is half of female, that is alpha is equal to 0.5. So this is how competition coefficient can be used to convert individuals of one species to another species. Now some important terms which will be used in deriving the equation, Lotka-Volterra equation for competition are N1, N2, R1, R2 and T. N1 is number of individuals of species 1, N2 is for 2, R1 is the intrinsic rate of increase of species 1, R2 is the intrinsic rate of increase of species 2, T is the time. K1 is the carrying capacity of species 1, K2 is carrying capacity of species 2, alpha is the competition coefficient, that is the effect of species 2 on species 1, whereas beta is the effect of species 1 on species 2. So these are the terms which we need to know what they signify. Now when two species are living together and they are competing for the common resource, there are four possible outcomes. First is species 1 outgrows species 2, it inhibits the growth of species 2 and therefore species 2 goes extinct. Second is species 2 inhibits growth of species 1 and it outgrows species 1 and therefore species 1 goes extinct. Third is both species inhibit the growth of each other more than they inhibit their own growth. That is, interspecific competition is much more as compared to intraspecific competition. Therefore, there will come a time when one of the species will go extinct. Which species will go extinct will only depend on the initial population density. The population which was having higher initial density, that is usually going to be the winner. Whereas fourth outcome is that both the species coexist together. Neither of the species is able to eliminate other, because herein there is much more of intraspecific competition than interspecific competition and they inhibit growth of individuals of the same population rather than that of the other species. Now moving further on, before we move on to see how these four possible outcomes are possible, let us have a look at the zero growth isocline or the graphs of species 2 and species 1. Here basically we are representing species 1 on x-axis and species 2 on y-axis. Species 1 we can see is represented by N1 in x-axis, so that is the number of individuals of population 1, and species 2 on y-axis, that is the number of individuals of population 2. Here we can see a green dark line has been drawn which joins the x-axis to y-axis. Here K1 is basically the carrying capacity for species 1, and in the y-axis we see K1 by alpha. K1 by alpha is basically representing the number of individuals of species 2 which is equivalent to the carrying capacity of species 1. So K1 by alpha is nothing but those many individuals of species 2 which are equal to the carrying capacity for species 1. For example, if K1 is 100, then K1 by alpha in N2 is basically equivalent to 100 carrying capacity. And the dark green line which we see here is the zero isocline line. At all points in this line, the number of individuals of species 1 added to number of individuals of species 2 are equivalent to carrying capacity. So whatever point you take in line, at any point, if you take the x coordinate as well as the y coordinate, all the individuals which add up here, they represent the carrying capacity or K1 for this particular line. And in this particular line, dn1 by dt, that is the growth rate of population, is 0. That is, there is no increase in the population of species 1. Therefore, it is represented at dn by dt is 0, which is zero growth isocline. Towards the left of this line, we see arrows pointing toward the line, which means that this is the zone where dn by dt is greater than 0 because the number of individuals is not that high, and therefore the resource is not being used to a very great extent, and therefore the population keeps on increasing. But if we look at the right hand side, then we see that arrows are moving towards the left direction towards the line, which signifies that here the rate of growth of population of species 1 is less than 0. That means if the number of individuals increase to this particular extent, then the population will start declining. Similarly, if we consider species 2, here we see in the y-axis, we see for species 2 there is K2. K2 means the carrying capacity for species 2, and corresponding to that in x-axis we see the notation K2 by beta. K2 by beta is basically the number of individuals of species 1 which is equivalent to the carrying capacity for species 2. And here we see that arrows are moving towards the upward direction as well as towards the downward direction. So any zone which is downward of this particular line, this particular zone, it will see that the individuals of species 2 increase in number. And if the species 2 individuals are falling in this zone, that means it has overshot its carrying capacity, then the population growth rate will start declining. At any point in the line, this orange line, dn by dt is 0. That means there is no growth in the number of individuals. How many individuals are being born? Similar number of individuals are dying. And at any point in this line, the number of individuals of species 1 along with the number of individuals of species 2, the sum total will only be the carrying capacity for species 2, that is K2. So when we have talked about this, then I come to the different outcomes which are possible when these two species are competing. This figure just represents the same thing which I have already talked about. K1, the notation of importance is K1 here, K1 and K1 by alpha, and K2 and K2 by beta. Now we come to the possible outcome. The first possible outcome is when species 1 wins. Now in this particular case, if we look carefully, we see that the equilibrium point or the stable equilibrium point or the carrying capacity K1, this is K1, this is K1 by alpha, excuse me, and this is K2 by beta, and this is K2. So this is the zero growth isocline for species 2, this is zero growth isocline for species 1. Here we see that carrying capacity for species 2 is K2, which is way less than K1 by alpha. I have already told earlier that K1 by alpha is that number of species of individuals of species 2 which is equivalent to K1. But here we see that if the population of this particular species keeps on increasing, it can maximally reach K2. It can never reach K1 by alpha. K1 by alpha is that point where in that particular region only individuals of species 2 will remain and there will not be any individuals of species 1, because here we can see it is a point on y axis, it is not a point on x axis. So at this particular point only individuals of N2 will remain, there will not be any individuals of N1. But here we see carrying capacity is reached much earlier as compared to the K1 by alpha. So N2 individuals will never be able to reach K1 by alpha, and therefore species 1 individuals will keep on increasing because K1 is quite high, and this will keep on increasing and they will reach a point where they will reach the carrying capacity and there will be no individuals from species 2, that is N2 will be 0, only N1 is equal to K1 will be there. Whereas in another case which we see here, K2 is the point, K2 is the carrying capacity for species 2, and here we see K2 by beta is the number of individuals of species 1 which is equivalent to the carrying capacity of species 2. But here again we see the carrying capacity for this particular region is K1. That means individuals of species 1 can never go farther than this particular number. Suppose this is 80 and 100 individuals are required for exterminating species 2. 100 individuals of species 1 are required for exterminating individuals of species 2. But here we see that this environment can only support 80 individuals. So number of individuals of species 2 will never be able to reach 100. Therefore, species 2 individuals will keep on increasing, and there will come a time when all the individuals of species 1 will be removed from the population, and therefore species 2 will win in this particular situation. Then coming to third possible outcome wherein competition can go either way. Here we see that K1, K2 by beta and K1. K2 by beta is much less as compared to K1, and K1 by alpha is much less as compared to K2. So any of the species can increase their number to reach K2. If suppose species 2 reaches K2, then there will not be an individual of species 1. If suppose species 1 reaches K1, then there will not be any individuals of species 2. So both the species are able to reach their carrying capacity, and the competition can go either way, but it only depends on what was the initial number of species 2 or species 1. The species which was having higher number will be able to reach the equilibrium as compared to other species. And then fourth is coexistence. As we can clearly see here, again the carrying capacity is much less as compared to the number of individuals required for exterminating other species in both the cases for species 1 as well as species 1 as well as species 2. So herein, what will be the outcome? That both the species will be living with each other and there will be coexistence between competing species. So these are the 4 possible outcomes which can happen whenever there are 2 competing species and they are competing for the same resource and they have a specific carrying capacity for the given resource. Now this particular aspect was better explained by experiment which was conducted by Gauss. G.F. Gauss, he basically took ciliate species of Paramecium. 2 species he took, Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium cordatum. So he took them in laboratory condition, provided them food, specific amount of food, and in one set he basically grew them separately, and in another set he grew them together. So what did he find out? That he found out that in a specific when they are growing alone, then they follow a specific pattern of growth. But when they are growing together, it was seen that Paramecium aurelia outcompetes Paramecium cordatum because it has a higher intrinsic growth rate value and it can tolerate higher density better as compared to Paramecium cordatum. So in all these subsets where both the species were grown together, Paramecium aurelia outcompetes cordatum and only Paramecium aurelia species survive. Whereas in another subset, when Paramecium cordatum is grown with Paramecium bursaria, both the species are able to grow together because they are able to utilize different part of the beaker where they are growing, because they are going to use resource from different region. One species uses the resource or food from the column of the water, another uses from the bottom of the water. So this particular graph shows how Paramecium aurelia, when grown separately, how it fares. When grown in mixed population, how it fares. The number does decrease, but it follows more or less similar growth pattern. Whereas cordatum, when it's grown separately, it follows a specific growth pattern, and when it's grown in mixed population, it basically gets exterminated due to competition by Paramecium aurelia. So this experiment was the foundation on which was laid the Gauss's principle of competitive exclusion, which maintains that 2 species with identical niche cannot coexist together indefinitely. And when we talk of niche, we mean that they are utilizing the same resource, they are utilizing the same habitat, they are living in the same habitat. All the conditional all the requirements which are all the requirements for growth or for food, all are similar for the 2 species. And if there are such 2 species which are occurring in the same region, one of them sooner or later is bound to go extinct. 2 species cannot coexist indefinitely if they are having similar requirements. They have to differ in one or more requirement for them to exist indefinitely. Another experiment was conducted on flower beetles, Tribolium, Castanium and Tribolium confusum, and it was seen that the outcome of the competition was dependent on various environmental factors like temperature and humidity. Now, who wins the competition is dependent on the environment. For example, if we see in this table, in hot and moist condition, where the temperature was 34 degree and humidity was 70%, relative humidity, we see that Tribolium castanium was the winner. But if the temperature was reduced from 34 to 24 and relative humidity was reduced from 70 to 30, we see that Tribolium confusum was the winner. So both the species are competing with each other, but which species win in the competition, which species is able to outcompete other, was depending on environmental condition in this particular case. Another study was done by Tillman, who studied 2 species of diatoms, namely Asterionella formosa and Synedra ulna, and he saw that both the diatoms were basically utilizing silica for their growth, and he found that Synedra was able to maintain growth at lower levels of silica, and when they were grown together, Synedra was utilizing silica and it caused the silica level to fall to such a low extent. But even when they fall to very low extent, Synedra individuals were able to survive because they were able to maintain their growth. But Asterionella required a higher level of silica content, and when the level of content fell very low, then Asterionella individuals got extinct. So this particular panel shows us, graph shows us how the Asteronella formosa individuals, how their level, how the number decreased to a very great extent, whereas Cynidra individuals maintained their population, and the number decreased because the silica level was decreased to a very great extent by Cynidra ulna individuals. Now this tells us that the competition amongst individuals may be due to resource factor, that they are directly competing for a resource, or it could also be because of non-resource factors, wherein environmental factors might be able to modulate or limit the growth rate of the competing species, wherein one species will be prevented to reach its critical or the carrying capacity because of certain specific environmental condition. Like in this particular panel, we see that temperature affects germination of different types of weeds or different types of grasses, and we see that foxtail is the species which germinates to greater extent when the temperature high. Whereas ragweed germinates to greater extent when the temperatures are low. So depending, there is a specific region where the grasses can germinate, but depending on the temperature, there is a specific competition occurring between different species. So it is basically a non-resource competition where temperature is deciding which species becomes more superior competitor. Another study was done by Susan Warner on hyla, which is the frog, on the effect of pH on the growth of the larvae of Hyla gratiosa and Hyla femoralis, and it was found that at pH 4.5 there was very less competition, but at pH 6 the Hyla femoralis individual, they caused decreased survival and decreased survival of Hyla gratiosa larva, and also increased larval period for Hyla gratiosa. Another study done by Peter Dye on South African grassland again shows that during different rainy regimes, that is, if there is less rain, one of the species is increasing in number. If there is more rain, then another species is increasing in number. So all these point towards, what exactly are they pointing towards? That there are non-resource factors which might play a role in deciding the shift in competition. Which species establish itself, which species become competitively superior, that might be dependent on environmental factor like temperature and moisture in a given region. Another experiment was conducted by Groves and Williams, which basically was an experiment involving skeleton weed and clover weed, wherein they were grown separately or they were grown together, and it was found that when both the species were grown together and their roots were intermingled, it was seen that the biomass of skeleton weed reduced by 35%. If only canopies were intermingled, biomass of skeleton weed reduced by 53%, and if both canopy and roots were intermingled, there was reduction in biomass 69%. So here we see that might be they are competing for resource like sunlight or for nutrients. When there is a competition for multiple level of resources, then the effect of competition might vary in all these subsets. Then environmental gradient might also cause a change in the competitive ability of individuals, as can be seen in this population. From wet to dry condition, we see when a single species is grown, we can see smartweed is growing very profusely. But if a number of species are grown together in a community, we can see that in wet condition, smartweed is growing properly, but in dry condition, the number of individuals declines to a very great extent. Coming to one of the last part of the lecture, which basically talks about resource-based competition. Before that, I'd just like to sum up that competition for species to prevent themselves from getting competitively excluded, they have to either go for character displacement, that they make a change in the character which is causing the competition, or they go for resource partitioning, that is divisioning of resource among themselves. And then I come to resource based competition, which was basically a product of study of Tillman, which is basically a resource ratio hypothesis, which introduced the concept that the resource level of a particular resource level decides the number of individuals which will be present of a given population, where R star is the level of resource which is needed to balance the mortality, which is needed to balance the population of any species. Now, if the resource is provided at a given rate, resource ratio, then the growth rate for this particular population will be 0, and the number of individuals will just balance the mortality, so the population will neither increase neither decrease in size. So this particular hypothesis talks that there is basically a trade-off, which means that for there is a strong competitive ability for, if there is strong competitive ability for one resource, then there will be poor ability for another resource. So I'll be talking about how it happens for two species. Now this particular line, it basically the zero isocline line of resource usage for A, and this is for B. For all the levels of resources which lie below this particular line, only species A will be able to survive. And if the levels are beyond this, then both species A and B will be able to survive. But if the level are less, if the species A is able to live at lesser level of resources, then it will outcompete species B. Whereas if species B is able to utilize the lesser level of resources, then it will outcompete species A. There might also come a time when both the species are able to live together, and that will only happen if they both are utilizing the same resource to a great extent, and if there is basically intersection for the zero isocline resource line for both species A and species B. So this was another model of competition which was given by Tillman in plants for resource based competition. So that will be all for competition, which is an interaction of community in today's lecture. Thank you.